Hydrogen is the fuel of the future and the most critical element that will drive the decarbonization ambitions globally.
We are building by far the biggest installation in Europe, which will be used to decarbonize shipping, industry, heavy trucking, all kinds of energy use that can't be electrified.
It is both exciting and rewarding to be at the forefront of the energy transition.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome, Maarten. I was just saying, the last time that I saw Maarten was at Cepsa's beautiful headquarters in Madrid. So now it's my turn to welcome you back to Dubai. So welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here. Great to be back in Dubai. I lived here 20 years ago. City's changed a bit since then, but pleasure to be back here.
We were just talking about the transformation of this city over the past 20 years. It's pretty extensive, eh?
But the Jumeirah the towers did exist.
Yeah.
So in a way, we're in a historic place.
Well, actually, that's a good segue in, because it's not just this city that's been going through a big transformation recently. Your company has too, along with the partnership of Mubadala. Cepsa has been going through a huge transformation. What can you tell us about Cepsa's main projects?
So Cepsa, which is not a global brand, but I'll give you, so the context is, it's a 100-year-old company that for about 100 years has been focused on oil and chemicals, very successfully and very professionally, built up a global portfolio. 2 years ago, we decided that with Mubadala as our majority shareholder and then Carlyle, we decided that the future was already happening and we weren't quite part of it. So we want to get ahead of the curve and said, okay, we're gonna transform this company, which in a situation with only 2 shareholders who are aligned about strategy is a lot easier, I can tell you, than if you're on the public capital markets, as I was before. So we decided to transform, and essentially the 2 words that the strategy is called positive motion, but the 2 words that would best synthesize it are green molecules. So we're investing up to $8 billion in transforming the company from a classic oil and chemicals company to a company that gets more than 60% of its income from sustainable energy, from renewable energy, and mostly on the molecule side. So that will be green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel, green methanol, green ammonia, etc. We also do super fast electric charging because we have 2,000 retail stations that we also want to transform. But the core of the heart of the transition is these green molecules and the belief that we can be a European leader in that space, whereas on the oil side, we were the number 2 in Spain. So it's jumping the queue to European leadership.
And you are developing some pretty big projects in Spain. What can you tell me about those?
Yeah, the unique situation we find ourselves in is, in order to make green molecules, you need a lot, but what you particularly need is cheap, renewable electricity. And the south of Spain has more sun hours than any other region in Europe. It has quite good wind as well for offshore wind, and it has a lot of space, so you can actually build large renewable projects. So we get really low-cost renewable electricity feeding our electrolyzers, and then we turn that into hydrogen, and then into green ammonia, and then into green methanol, and use the hydrogen also for the sustainable aviation fuel. But the key, these are quite new businesses. So you don't quite know what the revenue line of those projects will look like. So the key in this is to be the lowest cost producer. So we are all focused on making sure that our electricity is cheaper than anybody else in Europe, because 75% of the cost of green hydrogen sits in the electricity, so you got to get that right. And then the cost of all these supplies and the labor, etc. And if you put that all together, we are convinced that we will be the cheapest, we will have the cheapest production base of green molecules in Europe. And from there, you can really be progressive about being first in theater, first in market, developing those value chains, and indeed becoming the European leader in green molecules, which is what we want to be well before 2030, actually probably by 2028.
Can you tell us the link between green molecules and decarbonisation? And also from your vantage point as well, what do you think that the diversified energy mix can and will look like in the future?
No, absolutely. And it's important. It's not always recognized or public knowledge. But if you take the whole energy system today, about 20% of all energy is consumed through electricity, and 80% through molecules, through fuels, gas, gas and oil, essentially, and coal. And so, of the two, electrons and molecules, electrons are very easy to decarbonize. Sun, wind, nuclear, hydro, storage, and you're net zero on your electricity. So the first thing you have to do is to electrify as much energy usage as you can. And then and that gets you from the 20% currently up to 50% if you do it well, maybe 55 in that area. But that still leaves you with the other 50% of the energy mix that you can't electrify because you need to fly a plane or bring a ship to New York Harbor or drive a heavy truck all the way through Europe. Batteries won't do the trick. You need a higher energy density, more storage, etc. You need a molecule, and that's trickier. Basically, the candidates are biofuels, which is great. So you use basically organic waste together with green hydrogen and turn it into sustainable aviation fuel or into biodiesel. And that's a really good solution because it uses today's engines. You can put Emirates flies on SAF today, not exclusively, but it uses it. And you can drive a truck all the way to Europe on biodiesel today, so you don't need to change infrastructure. The problem with biofuels is that there's only so much organic waste around. So biofuels can be, at best, on a lucky day, 10% of the energy system in 2050. And by chance, that's also more or less the size of the aviation industry by then. So in my mind, I always say, okay, biofuels will solve aviation, but then we have 40% more to solve. And essentially, the hydrogen-based carriers, energy carriers, hydrogen itself, methanol and ammonia, are the main candidates to fill that gap. The other one would be fossil fuel with carbon capture and storage, which is totally credible and doable, but it's kind of the last resort. So scaling up hydrogen and its derivatives from zero today to 10, 20% of the energy mix is a huge opportunity for business to invest in and for a company like us to lead.
You touched on it earlier, but let's talk a little bit about maritime transport. How do you decarbonize one of these hard to abate sectors like maritime transport? And can you give us a sort of idea of like the scale and the size that needs to be too?
Yeah, and it's quite visual, because maritime transport, if you visualize a big boat with a big cloud of black smoke behind it, that's the visual contamination, and that's all air quality. You don't even see the CO2 yet. That's also in there. Maritime transport is about 3% of the total global CO2 footprint. It's relevant. It could, in principle, use biofuels, but we just gave that to the aviation industry. And if that doesn't work, then really the only way to get it down to net zero is for it to use either green methanol or green ammonia. At some point, we might be able to use hydrogen, but there are technical reasons why that doesn't work yet. And both are totally doable. Where I think you will go in order to have really net zero and net pollutive, which is really good for air quality, you'll see all the ships that carry passengers using green methanol, because it's a bit more expensive, but it's very safe to use. And the big professional ships will use green ammonia because it's cheaper, but it's also toxic, so you need professional crews to handle it. That's where I think it will go. And it will mean a lot, 3% of the global CO2 footprint, but also an enormous amount of air quality improvement if we get that done.
Now, over the course of your career, you've seen a few false starts, shall we say, when it comes to green hydrogen. What is different this time? And is that leading to more optimism in your mind about this becoming a success?
Two big things. So the hydrogen had its first big day in the sun, late 90s, early 2000s. And I was part of that as well.
And very young man at that time.
Yeah, just out of high school. The two things that have changed since then, I think if you look at the world in 2023 compared to the world in 2000, the world is much more committed to the energy transition. In 2000, there was kind of this novel, this nice idea of doing something about it. And now there's enormous urgency and commitment and determination. So that's one. But also, at the time, green hydrogen would have been hugely expensive, because solar and wind were hugely expensive, and electrolyzers were. So it's become much more in the money. In an economy where you have a decent carbon price, which, for example, in Europe we believe we have, Grey hydrogen and green hydrogen are almost cost comparative. So once you put the carbon price into the mix, green hydrogen at today's cost actually competes on its own. For those two reasons, I'm pretty sure it will happen. Also because, you know, whether you're familiar with TINA, there is no alternative.
Yeah.
There is no alternative. So it will have to happen.
And you're optimistic?
I'm optimistic about it. I think also if you go to Brussels, they're kind of high on hydrogen. You always have to calm people down to say, you know, it's going to take time and it's difficult and we need your help. So there are places that are maybe even running ahead of themselves. And every morning, every afternoon, there's a hydrogen conference somewhere in the world. So for the conference industry, it's been really great. But I am optimistic because there's also a lot of real activity on it. There are truck manufacturers designing and starting to build hydrogen trucks. There are shipyards in Korea and China that now offer methanol and ammonia-based ships. There's a German utility that's building a power plant that can run on natural gas and ammonia. So it's not just announcements and PowerPoints and good intentions. We're seeing physical activity creating this hydrogen economy. And that's why we're so keen to be a leader in it, because it's exciting. And hopefully not only just financially rewarding, but also personally rewarding for the 11,000 people that make up Cepsa.
Yeah. Well, Maarten,
and everybody that supports us.
We're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time, but it's such a pleasure to talk to you, and good luck with the rest of your COP and with the rest of your endeavours over the next month or so.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.